Heavenly Father, thank you for this other day. Thank you that if it all comes to church today, I ask that you'll bless us through this morning and that we'll get through this, actually get through it properly, and that we'll learn something from what there's us to say, and that we'll take it all in Jesus' name.
Amen. Yeah, so I have quite an ambitious plan this morning. We're currently in chapter 2, verse 19, and I'm hoping that we can make it to the end of the chapter today, which is verse 23. So I'm hoping to get through 4 verses, but I think they're really exciting verses. So you all there? Chapter 2. Ruth chapter 2, and we'll be at verse 19. So if you remember what we've looked at the last couple of weeks, in Ruth chapter 2, Ruth and Naomi have come back to Israel, but they've come back as widows. So they're poor, struggling to survive. At the start of chapter 2, Ruth suggests that she go out to the fields and collect grain for them to eat. And then we talked about the law of gleaning, right, that allowed her to do that. It's part of the Israeli, social welfare system that allowed poor people to go into farmers' fields and collect up grain to feed themselves. And farmers were commanded not to harvest all of their grain, and they were commanded to, anything that fell to the ground, leave it there for the poor to come and have. And so that's what she did. And so she went off to do that, and it says she just happened to end up in Boaz's field. And who was Boaz?
Cool man.
Yeah, he was a relative. He was a relative actually of Naomi's husband, who had passed away. But he was essentially a relative by marriage to Naomi and Ruth. And so she just happened to end up in Boaz's field. And then while she's there, gleaning, Boaz happens to arrive, and he notices her. And he's obviously impressed by her, he's impressed by how hard she's working. He's impressed by her loyalty to Naomi, that she's come back to Israel with her, and he has obviously been looking after Naomi, and it seems like most of Bethlehem knew that she'd been looking after Naomi. And he was impressed with the way in which she had made Israel's God her God. And for all of those reasons, he was impressed with Ruth, and he decided to look after her, I guess. He gave her special privileges. He invited her to have lunch with his workers, and gave her food. He said, you can basically harvest grain anywhere, stay in my fields, don't go anywhere else, have whatever you want, basically. He told his workers to not stop her from, even if she collects grain from the fields or out of your bundles, just let her. And in fact, sometimes just accidentally drop some grain for her to pick up. And he said he would provide her with water and would tell everybody to leave her alone, basically, keep her safe. And so that's what he did. And so she worked all day, and at the end of the day, she'd been out in the sun all day. She had to thresh the grain that she'd collected, and it says that when she'd done threshing it, she had 14 kilograms of barley, which is quite a lot.
Okay.
And now it's dark, and she has to carry all of this 14 kilograms of barley back to Bethlehem, to town, to her mother-in-law, Naomi. And that's where we got up to. Verse 18, she carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much grain she had gathered. Then Ruth gave her some of the grain that she had saved from mealtime, from lunch, to save some of the food to give to Naomi when she got back. And that brings us to verse 19. Who wants to read it?
Just 19.
No.
And her mother-in-law said to her, where have you gleaned today? And where did you work? Blessed be the one who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law.
That's all right. Sorry. Yeah, not all of 19. I've just seen it split. Okay, so Naomi, when she sees how much grain Ruth has, she knows something's up. This isn't like a normal day's gleaning. something's going on. And so she's like, where were you today? How did you end up with all this grain? Very sus. Although she says maybe she's obviously doesn't think Ruth stole it. She's been around Ruth long enough to know that that's not obviously something Ruth's going to be doing. She assumes somebody's been looking after her. And she's sort of wondering who. So you can finish verse 19.
So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and said, "The man's name with whom I work today is Boaz." Dun, dun, dun. Okay, go.
Perfect.
Okay.
That's good. Okay, so no, okay. So a couple of things we get from verse 19. Well, from verse 19. One, Ruth doesn't appear to have known who Boaz was, right? And Naomi doesn't appear to have known where Ruth was. That's why she asked, "Where did you go today?" And so when we were talking about like the just happened, I mentioned that it, at least in the way that it's presented, is supposed to be a complete coincidence because Ruth didn't know who Boaz was, so she hadn't gone and sought him out. Naomi didn't know where Ruth was going, and so she hadn't set it up either. So somebody else had been doing the setting up. Up there somewhere. Yeah. Okay. So, alright, then. Karen, verse 20.
Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "Blessed be he of the Lord, who has not forsaken his kindness to the living and the dead." And Naomi said to her, "This man is a relative of ours, a relation of ours, one of our close relatives."
Alright, so this is where everything starts to pick up pace a bit. The story starts to thicken. Naomi is a good Jewish mother. She knows how the Jewish community is organized. And when she realizes that Ruth has been in a close relative's farm, and that close relative has apparently been showing her special attention, her mind starts to tick. And she realizes immediately the implications of that. Now, I think it's interesting to note that this Naomi, who says, "May he be rewarded by the Lord because he has shown loyalty to the living on behalf of the dead," this is the same woman who not long ago came into Bethlehem saying, "Call me Mara because the Sovereign One has treated me very harshly." But now she's starting to see God's plan unfolding. She's starting to see God work all things together for good in their lives. Although she's not going to see the full extent of that picture until she's looking down from eternity, because the consequences of what happens in this story are like huge, and they don't fully play out until 1,500 years later when Jesus is born. Okay, so anyway, then we're introduced to an extremely important concept. I would say this is the most important concept in the entire book of Ruth. It's pretty much the reason why we're reading the book of Ruth, and it's foundational to everything else that we're going to be discussing. And that is the last thing that Naomi says there. She says, "This man is a..." Do you want to read it? What did it say in your version?
In 21.
Verse 20, just at the end.
This man is a relation of ours, one of our close relatives.
One of our close relatives.
Yes.
Okay. In mine it says, "He is our guardian."
Oh.
And in older or sort of more traditional translations, it's "He is our redeemer" or "our kinsman redeemer." The word that is being translated into close relative, guardian, or redeemer or kinsman redeemer is a Hebrew word called goel. Not called goel, it's a Hebrew word goel. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. What is a goel? Now, if you remember, I think the first week during the introduction, I talked about this thing called the law of first mention. Do any of you remember that?
Remember what?
The law of first mention. It's this idea related to studying the Bible which is basically that the first place that any concept, any idea, any word is used in the Bible usually turns out to be really important, really significant for the way that we understand that concept through the rest of the Bible. Okay? This is a really important concept, goel. So, to be clear, what Ruth said there in that verse 20 is she said, this man, speaking about Boaz, is a close relative of ours. He is our goel. So that's who she says Boaz is. And so we want to know what a goel is. So a good place to start in figuring out what a goel is to look where that word is used in the Bible. And in particular, to look at the first place that word is used, because it's probably going to tell us a whole bunch about how we're supposed to understand it. The example I gave in that first one was the word love. Does anybody remember where the first place that the word love is used in the Bible is?
I feel like I was doing slides. I have no idea.
Yeah. It's God speaking to Abraham and telling him to sacrifice your only son whom you love, Isaac. And that verse reminded us of another verse where the word love is used. Do you guys remember what that is? It was very similar. It's like basically you guys said to me, it reminds you of John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. The very, very first place that the word love is used in the Bible is speaking about the love that a father has for his son that is going to be sacrificed. That's pretty much the greatest love. That's what the Bible's all about, right? Is the father sacrificing the son that he loves on behalf of the people that he loves. And so in the very first place that the word love shows up, it like captures the whole idea behind the love that's described in the Bible. So anyway, first place that the word goel is used is also back in Genesis. And it's in Genesis 48, when Jacob, do you guys remember who Jacob is? Abraham, Isaac, we just talked about, his son Jacob. And then Jacob is blessing Joseph's sons. Do you remember what Joseph's sons' names were? It was in the quiz.
I wasn't at the quiz either. This is so bad. Manasseh.
One of them is Ephraim.
Yeah.
And Manasseh.
Manasseh. Yeah, Ephraim and Manasseh.
Okay.
So Jacob is blessing Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph's sons. And he says something really strange. He says, may the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all harm, bless these boys. Okay? The word redeemed is goel. So that's the first place in the Bible that the word goel shows up. It's Jacob saying, may God who has been my shepherd all my life long, the angel who has goeled me, who has redeemed me from all my heart, from all harm, bless these boys. Is that a strange verse? No, it's not a trick question. Is there anything in that verse that seems kind of strange?
The fact that the word angel is bold.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't have bolded it. Probably
Is
should
that
have
the
bolded
word?
redeemed. No. What is he saying?
Yes.
The God who has been my shepherd, that makes sense. Who is the angel that redeemed Jacob?
The angel who is something?
Maybe the angel is God.
Who is that?
It just says angel.
That's kind of how it sounds, right?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make sense to say an angel, Gabriel or Michael or somebody like that, redeemed Jacob. It makes sense that God redeemed Jacob. The question is then, why does he say the angel?
I don't know.
So I actually did like a whole study on this, which I wanted to share, but in the end, I didn't know if I would have time, and it felt like it would be a distraction, like it would it wouldn't fit the flow of what I actually want to share with you today, but it's something that's worth doing, and I might put it up as like a supplementary video on Facebook or something like that. I don't know. I'll see. But just briefly, there are a whole bunch of places in the Old Testament where the word angel is used in a context that appears to be speaking about God, as though the angel is God. It's quite strange. We will look at one example, which is relevant to this statement that Jacob is making. So the question is, who is this angel that Jacob is talking about? So we go back in time to Genesis chapter 31. Jacob, so if you remember the story of Jacob steals Esau's blessing. Do you remember that?
Yes.
His mum puts goat skin on him, makes a nice meal, steals Esau's blessing. Esau is furious. Esau wants to kill Jacob. So what does he do?
Run away.
He runs away to Haran, to his uncle Laban. And while he's there, he finds a couple of wives.
It's a bit complicated.
A bit complicated, right. And then eventually there starts to become problems between him and Laban. And so he gets worried that Laban wants to harm him, and so he flees from Laban and heads back to Esau. Okay? And this is on his way, or this is as he's about to head back to Israel, back to Esau. He has a dream, and he's telling his wives, Leah and Rebekah, about his dream. And he says, in the dream, the angel of God said to me, so this is an angel. This angel of God said to me, Jacob. Here I am, I replied. Then he said, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the sacred stone and made a vow to me. Now leave this land immediately and return to your native land. Okay? It's an angel of God. What does this angel say?
I'm the God of Bethel.
I am God. Right? I'm the God of Bethel. Does that seem strange?
Yeah.
But does it kind of relate to Jacob's blessing? Where he says that there was this angel that redeemed him. And he speaks as though, well, it sort of sounds as though that angel must be God. Or at least he's using the word angel in the context of God. This, I think, is the angel he's talking about.
Yeah.
The angel that says, I am the God of Bethel. The question is, who then is the angel, the God of Bethel? And to understand that, we have to go back a bit further in time.
Okay, we're actually doing this.
I'm traveling.
Where are we going?
We're going to Genesis 28.
Ooh,
So now
I'm right
this
here.
is Jacob on his way out of Israel to Haran. So Genesis 31, when he meets the angel that says, I am the God of Bethel, that's on his way home. But Genesis 28 is on his way out. And on his way out, he sets up camp one night to sleep, and he takes a stone and uses it as a pillow. And while he's sleeping, he sees this vision of a staircase that reaches to the heavens. And it says, the angel of God were going up and down it, and the Lord stood at its top. He said, I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham, and the God of your father Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the ground you were lying on. Okay? So who has he seen? The Lord. Who does this Lord say that he is?
The God of your grandfather.
So we know who this is, right? There's no confusion here. This is God. This is the Lord, the God of Abraham and of Isaac and now of Jacob, right? When he wakes up, he takes the stone that he'd been using as a pillar and he props it up and makes it into a memorial and he pours oil over it. And then he makes a promise and he says that if the Lord protects him on his journey and will bring him back home safely, then he will make that Lord his God. as opposed to all the other gods he's presumably heard of from the nations around. Okay? And then he names that place where this happened, Genesis 28, where that happened. He names it Bethel, which means Beth is house and El is God. House of God. So he names the place where he had that vision Bethel, and he anoints a stone and makes a vow to God, which is what it's talking about down here, right? I am the God of Bethel. Who is that?
God.
It's the one from up there, right?
Yeah.
It's the person you met on your way out. Who did he meet on his way out? The Lord. So this angel is claiming to be the Lord, right? So the point is, all through the Old Testament, you have this angel showing up that claims to be God. Usually, this is a vision, but usually he's actually in person. It's a person, a man that whoever he appears to interacts with, sometimes eats with, certainly talks with. But he's apparently God. So it's God in a human body. Who is God in a human body? Right. It's the Word made flesh, right? So the idea is that where you see this angel showing up in the Old Testament claiming to be God, it's Jesus. It's God in human flesh. So, we go back to Jacob is blessing Joseph's sons, and he says, may the God who has led me all my days, the angel who redeemed me from all my harm, and that word is redeemed. Who is the angel?
God.
And more specifically?
Jesus.
Jesus. So the very first place in the Bible that the word Goel shows up, the word redeemed, it is associated with who?
Jesus.
Jesus. Okay. So I think that's very significant. Then, yeah. So very first place the word Goel shows up, it's Jesus. Jesus is the Redeemer. He is the Goel. Okay? The next place that the word Goel shows up is in Exodus. And God says that he is going to rescue his people out of Egypt. And he is going to redeem them with an outstretched arm. And there again is the word redeemed. And then a little bit later, so if you remember the story, God brings plague after plague on Egypt until eventually the Egyptians drive the Israelites out. But then after Pharaoh sees them go, he changes his mind. And he chases after them with the entire Egyptian army. And that sets up one of the most dramatic scenes of the whole Bible. Because you have the nation of Israel, some million people, backed up against the Red Sea, behind them, and they're watching the Egyptian army descend on them in front of them. And at that moment, when there appears to be no way out, no way of salvation, God steps in between them. And he holds the Egyptians back. And then he splits the Red Sea behind them and allows them to flee to safety to the other side. Yeah? And once they're on the other side, all safe, God moves out of the way and allows the Egyptian army to chase after them. And when they're in the middle of the sea, he removes his hand, the water flows back, and the Egyptian army is swept away. And it is after watching this happen that the Israelites sing a song to God, a song of worship. And one of the things they sing is, by your loyal love, you will lead the people whom you have redeemed. That's the word Goel again. So that's the third place in the Bible that the word Goel shows up. In all three cases, who is the word Goel associated with?
Jesus.
Jesus is God, right? So it's very clear. The word Goel is associated with God. That's laid out in the first three times that it's used.
Easy peasy understand.
God is the Goel. God is the Redeemer. It's God who saves. Then we come to the book of Leviticus. And there things switch up a bit. In the book of Leviticus, we're introduced to this idea that that you can have a kinsman or a family redeemer. So this is somebody within the extended family who has the responsibility and the right to redeem property or people within his family. And so basically the idea is if you became indebted, I guess, and had to sell off your land, somebody else in your family was allowed to buy it back for you, to redeem it for you. And even worse, if you got in a situation where you yourself were so indebted to somebody and you had no ability to pay it, you'd already sold all of your property, the only thing left was for you to become essentially a slave to them, to work for them, to pay off your debts. And that was another place where this redeemer, the family redeemer, the kinsman, kin is family, so they say kinsman, it's a family redeemer, kinsman redeemer, was able to come in and purchase your freedom. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. And again, that term Goel is used, and it's used a whole bunch of times in the book of Leviticus. Now, does that idea create any sparks in your minds? The idea of a family member who can purchase your freedom?
When you're in prison, someone else can spend money to get you out of prison, right? Or are you talking about Bible stuff?
No.
Bible example.
This is more if you've been sold, you've become a slave to somebody. It wouldn't really apply so much if you were in prison. But it's if you have a debt to somebody, somebody else can pay. A family member can pay that debt on your behalf. Any relevance?
Jesus died on the cross.
Kinda, right? It's redeemer. It's a kinsman redeemer who redeems. What does Jesus do? What did he come to do?
Die on the cross.
To redeem us, right? To purchase our freedom, to pay our debts on our behalf. Okay. Now, the word Goel is used, as I said, extensively in 2 chapters of Leviticus. 10 times in chapter 25, 12 times in chapter 27. Every single time that the word Goel is used, it is associated with redeeming. Buying, purchasing the freedom either of property that belonged to somebody or the freedom of a person themselves, a family member. But it's always in that context of redeeming. Okay? Alright. Then, so that was one of the responsibilities of the Goel, of the family redeemer, was to redeem. He was the redeemer. Okay? But that was only one of his responsibilities. The Goel had another responsibility, and that was to enact justice on behalf of his family. So, if somebody was killed, if somebody killed somebody, that's getting confusing. If somebody was killed, it was the responsibility of the Goel to bring their killer to justice. Right? So they'd have to chase after this person and enact justice on behalf of their family. Okay. And that idea is, that responsibility is described in the books of Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua. Now, when that word is, so we have this term Goel. It's used in Genesis and in Exodus, and it's talking about God redeeming his people. Then it's used in Leviticus, and it's talking about people and property being purchased back. The freedom of people or property being purchased back. And then the word Goel is used in Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua. But when it's used in Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua, it's not translated Redeemer, because it doesn't make sense to translate it Redeemer. There it's translated Avenger. In all but 2 cases, the word Goel is linked with the word Hadam, which means the blood. And it is the avenger of blood. And so this was the Goel's responsibility to avenge the blood of his family members. So is that all making sense? We have the word Goel is associated with redeeming, but in Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua, it's associated with avenging, with bringing about justice on behalf of your family. Okay? So then I want to take a step back and look at, like, bigger picture, what the Bible is presenting to us, to understand the concept of the Goel better. So in Genesis and Exodus, God gives us the context. The key with which we can understand everything else he says about the term Goel, which is what? What do we learn from Genesis and Exodus?
The Redeemer.
Sorry?
Jesus is our Redeemer.
Jesus is the Redeemer. God is the Goel. So when you read about the term Goel, what you're reading about is God, right? He's the Redeemer. He's the Goel. Once he's laid that foundation in Genesis and Exodus, and he's made it very clear, this is the whole point, right? I am the Goel. Now he starts to give us details about what the Goel does. But he doesn't do it in like some theoretical, abstract, theological sense where he just like tells you what he's going to do. He does it in a living way. He explains it in a living way. If you think back, for those of you who were here when we looked at Ephesians, husbands and wives, how many of you are here? This is kind of like that. God is explaining this concept to us, but he's doing it by having us actually act it out. So he's creating this role within the Israeli community of the Goel, and he's giving him responsibilities. This is how you are to act, right? And in watching that play out, we will understand bigger picture what God is talking about when he says that he's the Goel. Does that make sense? So he's explaining the concept of the Goel, but in a living, experiential, like actually experiencing it way. So he gets his people to actually act out the role of the Goel, the kinsman redeemer. But who is the kinsman redeemer? Ultimately, Jesus. And note, he became man, which makes him what to us?
Equal. Similar.
So one of the things, in order to be a kinsman redeemer, you had to be kin, right? You had to be a family member. You had to be related by blood. That's what Jesus did in becoming man. He became related by blood to all of us, right? Which then means he is legally, in a way of speaking, able to act as our kinsman redeemer in the way that you had to be in the law that he gave. So then the question is, what does a kinsman redeemer do? And by extension, what will Jesus do? And that's what God is laying out for us in Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. He's describing it in a living way, the responsibilities of the kinsman redeemer, of our kinsman redeemer, of Jesus. And what were those responsibilities? What have we talked about? What is his first responsibility of a kinsman? Book of Leviticus. It was to... What does the Goel do? It's up there. Redeem, right? That's Leviticus. He's saying this is what the kinsman redeemer does, and by extension, this is what Jesus is going to do. He's going to redeem. He's going to purchase the freedom of, purchase back, pay the debt on behalf of his family to redeem us. Yeah? So he was our kinsman redeemer. He has redeemed us. Jesus has fulfilled his responsibilities as the kinsman redeemer. according to Leviticus. But what about Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua? What about his responsibilities as the kinsman avenger? How does he play that out? Has Jesus been the kinsman avenger yet?
No.
No, right? It's not what he came to do. He came to redeem. But the story isn't over. He's coming again. What is he coming again to do?
Avenge.
Book of Jude. Look, the Lord is coming with thousands and thousands of his holy ones to execute judgment on all and to convict every person of all their thoroughly ungodly deeds that they have committed and of all the harsh words that ungodly sinners have spoken against him. Revelation. Now, when the Lamb opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been violently killed because of the word of God and because of the testimony they had given. They cried out with a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, before you judge those who live on the earth and avenge our blood?" Revelation 19. After these things, I heard what sounded like the loud voice of a vast throng in heaven saying, "Hallelujah! Salvation and glory and power belong to our God, because his judgments are true and just. For he has judged the great prostitute who corrupted the earth with her sexual immorality and has avenged the blood of his servants poured out by her own hands." So, Jesus is coming back. What is he coming back to do?
Avenge. Our blood.
Judge.
Interesting.
Yeah, he's not coming back as the Redeemer. He's already done that. He's coming back as the Avenger to avenge the blood of his saints and to execute judgment and achieve justice on behalf of his family. That is why in the book of Romans we are told not to avenge ourselves. In Romans it says, "Do not repay anyone evil for evil. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all people. Do not avenge yourselves, dear friends, but give place to God's wrath, for it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay,' says the Lord. Rather, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." So in Romans, we're told we mustn't seek vengeance. We mustn't try to achieve justice for ourselves, because that's not our job. God tells us to love our enemies, right? To bless those who curse us. To overcome evil with good, to treat them well. Knowing that we have an avenger. We have a kinsman avenger. He's coming back and he will take care of justice. That's not our responsibility. He's the judge. Does that make sense? But it's all because he's coming back with that role. And so I find that completely astounding, because in the concept of the Goel, you have a prophecy of Jesus. You have, back in 2,000 years before Jesus was born, you have this idea of the Goel presented. He is the Redeemer, he is the Avenger. Right? You have the two comings of Jesus Christ described in the Goel. Does that make sense? Leviticus, Redeemer, first coming of Christ. Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, second coming of Christ. Jesus coming back as the Avenger. Does that make sense? I think that's amazing. It's really, really cool. And you have that then in the first three times that it shows up in Genesis and Exodus, laying that foundation that makes it clear that what's being described when the Bible talks about this Goel is God, that he is the ultimate Redeemer, that all of this is supposed to explain to us. And what I think is so cool is that, if I was to explain, so say I was going to set up this community and I was going to say there's going to be this person and their responsibilities, this Goel, and their responsibilities is going to be to redeem and to avenge on behalf of his family, I would explain that together in one place. But that's not the way that God does it. God keeps those two responsibilities completely separate. In Leviticus, all he talks about is redeeming. And then in Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, all he talks about is avenging. They're two completely separate things. Why? Because in Jesus' life, they're two completely separate things, right? And it's something that even Jesus' disciples were confused about, because they expected that when the Messiah came, he would redeem and avenge them. He would free them from the Romans, right? So they were confused about that. But Jesus wasn't confused about that. He knew why he'd come. He knew what role he had come to fulfill, and that was kinsman redeemer, Goel as the redeemer. In Luke chapter 4, Jesus goes to a synagogue in Nazareth. And while he's there, he stands up and reads from the scroll of Isaiah. And this is what it says. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and the regaining of sight to the blind. He has set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to tell them, "Today the scripture has been fulfilled, even as you heard it." So there, Jesus is quoting Isaiah, and he's quoting a specific chapter in Isaiah, chapter 61. Okay? And he reads that out to them. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." That's kind of a grand thing to be saying in the synagogue. God's Spirit is on me. He has sent me, He has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, the regaining of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And then he says, "Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in me." Right? That's quite a thing to say. And it says everybody's eyes were fixed on him because they couldn't believe that's what he was saying. Now, what's interesting is Jesus doesn't quote the whole verse that he's quoting, that he's reading from. He stops at a comma and he doesn't finish. This is what that passage actually says in Isaiah. It says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has chosen me. He has commissioned me to encourage the poor, to help the brokenhearted, to decree the release of captives and the freeing of prisoners, to announce the year when the Lord will show his favor, the day when our God will seek vengeance." Jesus stopped at the comma. He didn't finish it. Why not?
Because it's not the day of vengeance, right?
It's not the time. This is when, so because he said that verse, what he had just read, had been fulfilled as they heard it, right? But that part wasn't going to be fulfilled as they heard it. That was only going to be fulfilled in the second coming. So he knew what was going on. He knew he had come to fulfill the role of the Goel as redeemer, not as avenger, but that would come later. Make sense? Yeah, I think it's super cool. Okay. So now we know what a Goel is and who the Goel is, ultimately. Let's go back to the book of Ruth.
Oh, yay.
And read again what Naomi says when she discovers that Ruth has been gleaning in Boaz's field. Verse 20, Ruth says, "This man, Boaz, is a close relative of ours. He is our Goel. He is our Redeemer. He is this person within our family." And what that means is Boaz can redeem her property. The property that belonged to Elimelech, which presumably was sold before they left for Moab, and which meant that Ruth was now like propertyless, incomeless, right? This man, Boaz, is their redeemer. He has the right to purchase that property back from whoever it was sold to and to give it back to Ruth and Naomi, to essentially purchase their freedom, to provide for them again. Make sense? So she's excited. Because this person who happens to be Boaz, who happens to be their redeemer, their kinsman redeemer, also happens to be interested in Ruth, or appears to be interested in Ruth. Okay, so then verse 21. Who wants to read? 21 and 22.
Ruth the Moabite said, He also said to me, You shall stay close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, It is good, my daughter, that you go out with this young woman, and that people do not meet you with any other people.
Right, so Naomi is beginning to understand what's going on. And so she starts to coach Ruth, because Ruth is like, she's a Moabite. She doesn't know how things work in the Israeli community. Naomi does, and so she starts to help her along the way. But she starts by saying, for now, continue doing what you're doing. Stay in Boaz's field, stay with his female workers, because then you'll be protected from the others, and to basically remain on the path that has been set before her, which Naomi starts to suspect has somebody else is coordinating, somebody else is in control, that there's a bigger plan going on here. And then verse 23. Who else want to read?
I'll read. So she stayed close by the young woman of Boaz to glean until the end of the barley harvest and wheat harvest, and she dwelt with her mother-in-law.
Right, so that's what Ruth did. She kept gleaning in Boaz's field, and it says that she gathered grain until the end of the barley harvest as well as the wheat harvest. So the harvests came in two stages. We said the first harvest was the harvest of barley, which started around about Passover, Feast of First Fruits, in March or April. And then the second stage of harvesting started by the Feast of Weeks, so about 7 weeks later. And that was the wheat. And the wheat was harvested right through to midsummer, Northern Hemisphere summer, so like May, June. So several months passed. She was out there day after day in Boaz's field collecting grain to take home to Naomi so they could eat. And that's the end of chapter 2. A good place to start. A good time. All right. Does anybody want to use?